Dr. Kelkar ever since then that, you know, the wonderful gifts that he carries with him. On one hand, he and Lata, his wife, they are deeply spiritual on a spiritual quest. So we also have the same, you know, privilege of learning from Swami Tejomananda ji and the Chinmay mission. On the other hand, he continues to think far ahead. And in all his assignments, whether it was the head of the Kelkar committee, whether it was the chairman of the finance commission, and also the wonderful experiment he did to encourage innovation in the country in all sectors. I think Dr. Vijay Kelkar is the son of Mother India that we should all be very proud of. And we are very deeply grateful that he's here with us today. And he's especially going to engage in a dialogue with us on his new book on serving the Republic. And so with this, let me say how happy we are here, Vijayji, that you are with us. And may I request you to please make your opening comments and tell us about this book and what are some of the themes. I'm quite intrigued by, you know, I've downloaded it on Kindle and I'm reading it. So you know, over to you, Dr. Kelkar. Thank you.
Well, Anil, it's very kind of you to invite me to your institution and also give me such generous introduction. This book came out of my many years of search to even in India, even in English, a good sort of book which tells about the issues related to making of economic policy. Because there are good books on theory, good books on econometrics, but there are hardly any books on economic policy. They always feel that this one lacuna needs to be sort of rectified for nothing else. So it was with that intention I took, when I was invited by NCER to give in 2017 Sri Deshmukh Memorial Lecture. I picked up this theme, the art and science of economic policy. And I worked with, for that lecture with my professor, my colleague for now 20 years, Professor Ajay Shah, who's probably one of the finest minds today in India. And this book owes a lot of very, very substantial credit for this book really goes to Professor Ajay Shah. So we worked on that. That lecture was somehow, I was surprised, it was well received by many of our friends and colleagues, and they encouraged us to expand in a book form. So that is the genesis of this book. That our idea was the book should be accessible to not just graduate students in economics, but also to everybody who are interested in India's national economic policies and who are interested to understand how they are made and also to influence it. So try to make it as sort of accessible. So, but still, we didn't want to lose the rigor of discipline as we understood it. So we are trying to be faithful to the science of economic science and try to be as up to date as possible in terms of what is the current, our state of knowledge, scientific knowledge on economics. And also we thought that policy is not just science, art. So that is the genesis of this. This book has essentially 4 parts. Total 7 parts, but more important, the first one just talks about foundations of what is the purpose of the government, because we're talking public policy. And then we talk about, come straight to our own experience and why we say that in India there are policy failures, why things go wrong. And then stating this problem in first 2 parts, we straight come to science, economic science, and discuss both the sort of micro and macroeconomics, and in fact the what the economists call general equilibrium implications in policy making. After that, and the next part discusses art. That after all, this is sort of. I know the physicists don't like to call our economy a science. So it's really a part of social science. It's not as quote scientific, because we can't do experiments, frankly, in social science. So, the art part of it in policy making, that is kind of part 4. Then we said that try to give our understanding how public policy is made, how the process of making policy. And then we give 3 or 4 examples which are recent importance. For instance, GST or the health policy or financial sector, and also crisis management. So this is the structure of this book, and these are the approach we have taken. Essentially draws upon experience of both me and Professor Shah of working in India. We're working on real problems, actual problems, what we learned from them. And you know what, I'll make a final comment that you can have a good science in economic policy and this government can apply, but if it's done bad with bad art, they don't get the outcome we desire. And the classic example, if I may say so, for the recent farm laws. The science was, I think, very, very impeccable science, economic science, in terms of reforms of farm policy, but they just, it was so badly implemented because of bad art. So that's an example. Other example, which is both bad art and bad science, was the disastrous policy of demonetization, which is bad in science and bad in art. The third example of good science and good art was, I think, the best achievement of this government, when Jetiji was the finance minister, was this bankruptcy code. Insolvency and bankruptcy code was a major policy done with good science and good. Last example of very good science, but art still not good enough. So that's why it's sort of going through the example of GST. So you get these examples in India of various combinations of good art, bad art, good science, bad science, reasonably good, both sides. So we have been seeing examples of all of them. So this is what we have presented in this book. And last point is that we also try to introduce the important concept of the importance of state capacity, which really was an important explanatory variable about outcomes. State capacity decides also how good art is, how good science is. And then, of course, that is. So I'll stop at that, and then I will lead to the people comments, discussion, questions.
Yes. So Dr. Kelkar wanted this to be more like a conversation and a dialogue. So may I now invite questions from the floor? And let me just ask my own personal question first, Dr. Kelkar. You know, we are designing this new course called Future of Capitalism that we are doing in partnership with 12 schools from different parts of the world. And there is this intriguing question, that is the model of capitalism, the way we have known it.
Anil, I lost you. Can you repeat what you said?
You know, we have launched this global initiative on a course called the Future of Capitalism, which students from 12 major schools all over the world are attending.
Yeah.
And in that, the central question that the students are examining, and we have some very thoughtful practitioners and leaders from different parts of the world who are coming in, they're asking, is this capitalism model failing us because of the tremendous problems that it is posing to us? For instance, the inequality in incomes. For example, the damage to the planet and the environment. And you know, you've referred to some of these things in your book as well. But what are your comments about the overall model of capitalism and the way organizations and businesses and even governments have relied too much on one model, and which is not entirely working. So what's your own personal comment about that?
You see, my own sort of understanding of what's happening in the global economy, why the questions are being raised, is because essentially the rise of China was too rapid and the international system could not accommodate it. As simple as that. And that really destabilized. Here are the new economic power which is willing to work hard, play the same game of market economy, but just where they were better at it. And incumbents feel threatened, and essentially the problem is incumbency. I don't think there is any crisis of capitalism as such. It's really a market economy, global market economy, and it's, I call it a market economist. And that's really the upside that have been threatened because the incumbents have been didn't realize the pace at which they were threatened. And historically, this is exactly what happened. The Germany threatened Russia, the British dominance, and that led to Second World War. And now the very rapid rise of earlier Japan also very rapid rise led to the Pacific War. And now, unfortunately, not that ended in war, but God forbid, it can happen because the status quo powers are really not adjusting. That's really the crisis. I'm personally more worried about crisis of poverty than crisis of inequality, frankly. I think inequality is there, but that's not as important as hunger and poverty, which is what really affected majority of the Indian world population. So my take is a little different. I think essentially inability of global system to accommodate China is the main problem. And I think incumbents have to think that their privileges will be now eroded. So they can't, it's not a world as all what has been in the past, and they have to adjust to it. So markets, that I can't think of any other system which can help you to allocate resources more efficiently than market economy. So I don't think, I can't think of it. So it's not capitalism is not a challenge, it's essentially Western hegemony is being challenged. And that's where I think problem lies.
Questions from the floor, from the students and the faculty, please. Let me ask the second question while my colleagues are sourcing questions. I'm sure many have come and they're waiting for who will speak first, but let me then go to the second question. Would you like to talk a little bit, Dr. Kelkar, about this poverty issue, especially for India? What do you think we need to do to take responsibility? And I completely respect what you're saying, that the model of the market economy is not to be challenged, but you talked somewhere about the way we make policy and the way we implement it. You talked about the art and science, and that's what the book is about. But tell us more about your insights on poverty and what do we need to do?
Take the example of this farm law. I think in India, agriculture holds the key for our exiting poverty. There are two keys for exiting our poverty. One is agriculture and second is exports. But I'll come one by one. And the agriculture is that the model of Indian agriculture, which served well, which was designed for food security for a green revolution, has run out of its steam. And it is very important that we have to reform the current way of the way our incentive structure is there. And that was really the purpose, in my view, was of agriculture type of farm laws. But to do this, you require a very more thoughtful approach for structural adjustment to the new agriculture. It's not going to happen overnight. And that was the problem. The problem was the sudden change we wanted to seek. There's not enough thought given. In fact, if you remember, one of the most thoughtful Indian agriculture economists has been Professor S.S. Joel, who was to be the professor at Punjab University and I think Vice Chancellor of Punjab Agriculture University. And he has been talking about problems of Northwestern Indian agriculture for a long time. And he has given sort of way to adjust ourselves to different agricultural, so we have to change incentive structure and policies. So it takes time. We have to give time for this transition. Though we don't change their behavior. We should be, instead of being grateful to farmers who gave us food security, we ask them to change within 24 hours. Not possible, because that was the main problem. So, in the poverty lies in changing our structural base of agriculture. For instance, Indian consumption has changed from calories now to vitamins and proteins. So we have to change the supply side, the production side, and it requires time and reforms. So that is, I think, the beginning of change, reducing poverty by giving much larger employment in our agriculture and agro-processing industry. A second important source of employment is going to come from exports. All exports did the miracle in China, did the miracle in the same rate of the stage of development in Japan. You're doing the same miracle in Bangladesh. You're doing the same miracle in Vietnam. And India, I'm afraid, because of our policies, we are not really pursuing that second route for employment and poverty removal through higher productivity. So to remove poverty, we would increase the productivity of our labor force. And that will increase the sort of, in my view, this two-pronged attack of modernizing our agriculture, of shifting our agriculture base, and promoting manufactured exports and services sector export by much more aggressive and better trade policies. For instance, I don't know why India is shy to join RCEP. We're just losing out. We're one of the world's largest markets in the world. We don't have access to them anymore. So I think exports has to play a much larger role in employment generation, which will become your engine for poverty removal.
Okay. Okay. Other questions from the others, please? Your comments and questions? I know Jyoti Aluwalia, you were wanting to ask a question. Jyoti, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah, so you were wanting to ask a question. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. Vijay, sir, welcome to Soil. And I was just watching some of your YouTube videos, and in the IMA Public Service Excellence Award in 2019 that you received, during your speech, you said that real change agents of our system are the ministers because they take the risks. So I would like you to, elaborate for us more about, from your experience, how the initiatives of...
I think you're absolutely right in raising the issue, because all reform means change. Change means increased risks to some people, and some people, because future is not known, taking a sort of view on what needs to be done, and one can go wrong. So change implies risk, implies some possible probability to adverse outcomes. Now, it's essentially politicians who understand the need to change take the risk and bring out policy reforms. Because civil servants, my role as a civil servant was really propose ideas and suggestions, but I was not taking any risk because my job was assured, my salary was assured. But the minister who I was advising, he could lose the election if the things go wrong. He can lose his job, so to speak. So politicians are real entrepreneurs. They take risks because they want change, because they value change. They know that the society needs change. So they take risks because they want to change. And everywhere, I'll give a simple example, which my favorite example. But the most important decision I was associated with in my entire career in the government was liberalizing our pharmaceutical industry from price controls. That time, my minister was Vengal Rao. Vengal Rao ji was industries minister. He didn't go in schooling beyond 4th standard because he joined freedom movement of Gandhiji's. He joined freedom fighter, became chief minister of Andhra, became the minister. Okay, industry minister. And when I proposed to him, sir, complete decontrol vaccines, And I explained to why today the vaccine shortage is there, because our prices are not proper. And if you really want to incentivize production, you must liberalize it. He took the risk. And because if prices would have gone up in case and production would not have gone up, his job was on the line. I just give him my professional understanding and advice. But it worked, and India has become now the world's largest vaccine maker in the world by just one change which he introduced. He took the risk. That needs to be done. So I'm saying that the ministers take the risk because they're the one they're the change agents. Civil servants like technocrats are good analysts. They make good analysis based on the understanding of theory, but the consequences they don't have to pay for the consequences.
I just want to build a follow-up question to Jyoti here. You know, in your book, you talk about a coercive agent is poorly placed at solving failures of negotiation. And you talk about how the government, and you give these 4 reasons about market power, asymmetric information, externalities, and public goods. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Dr. Kelkar, as to how did these ideas strike you? Because you're obviously thinking with the power of your whole mind as you are trying to define this. Can you talk a bit more about that?
No, but what our basic proposition of our book was that government should not interfere with the markets. The markets are voluntary exchange and non-coercive, and they are taken by the participants with both the side benefits. So government should come in when there are market failures. Now, which are the market failures? So there are 4 areas of market failures. One is the classic example of externality. Now, externality is the classic example is what's happening in Delhi right now. When farmer burns his crop, he creates pollution which affects others, and that's what they call negative externality. So there, can't have this voluntary exchange. It has to government policies. So one is a bad externalities. Good externalities is an example of what you're doing. The soil is creating top-class education system by which not only the person benefits privately, but society benefits because of the skills and the values they're creating. So there are externalities which are created, so the government then should promote this positive externalities, and policies should discourage the negative externalities. The third example is the public good, that markets can't solve the problem of public goods. So public goods, everybody benefits. You can't exclude anybody. For instance, the national security is a classic public good. Markets is not. I can't give a solution because it's not that I am only safe by keeping our borders big, but everybody is safe, not just people who live the border. Entire country is safe. So that is the other reason why government has to intervene. And other issues are where the non-existing markets, the markets are missing, and then you have to also substitute for markets in the case of missing markets. So government should come in, the policies are required when the markets don't work either because of these reasons, or don't exist, or don't function. So that is what the thought was, that policies has to be devised. So the first choice of intervention should be the market itself first. That's your first choice, because they're non-coercive. But government means coercion. Coercion should be taken only in case of the market failures. That's the argument.
Yeah, sir, I have a follow-up question to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jyoti.
Yeah, so, but isn't that a very thin line? So, for example, in finance.
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah.
I'm just putting on the light.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, I mean, with my limited knowledge of the financial markets, what I see happening in India is that the government has facilitated an infrastructure that has led to, UPI and so much of online transaction that is happening. So there are players in the market, the startups or other banks, and now new neo banks or payment banks that have come up. But the basic infrastructure had to be built up by the government. So isn't there a very thin line in which so government has to decide where to, put in the policy, how much to go, when to stop? No,
that's where the analysis helps you. When you know that information economy requires infrastructure of telecom, which is not going to come from the market because the size of investment is so large and the uncertainty, the risk are so large that no market player is capable of that risk taking. While the government is a coordinating function, government has the ability to coordinate because it can influence both supply side and demand side. So for him, government or society as a whole has much lower risks. So wherever government action reduces the risk for the system as a whole, that's why you intervene. Because government can affect both supply and demand. A private sector cannot take the risk because he has a lot of things beyond his control. While government has a lot of, they can influence through taxation, through pricing, through investment, the demand side and supply side. So that's where the infrastructure is a classic good example. It's a public good because you cannot, there's a natural monopoly. You can't have two railway lines for joining both 2 points. You can only one railway line because that's where the infrastructure. So only government can start building the infrastructure, railway line. Later on, you can allow the private sector to run the freight corridors. But initial infrastructure investment will have to come from the state because otherwise there's a natural monopoly because you can't have more than one player in many cases.
Thank you. Salman, who's our head of career services, he was a senior industry leader in HCL. And incidentally, Dr. Kelkar, his father was a co-founder of Jamia Millia University. So we have Salman Mohammed. So Salman, would you like to ask? You have raised your hand. So go ahead and Salman, ask a question.
Thank you, Anil and Dr. Kelkar. It's a pleasure to be here this evening listening to you. Your powerful thoughts on all of these issues of immense importance that concern all of us. So my question to you is, we are happy to be seeing some form of recovery after the pandemic. In fact, one of the proofs of that is that the recruitment out of our campus this year has been possibly the best that it's been in the past several years, which means at least all the major companies are hiring in good numbers. But when we look around, we are still seeing the recovery as more K-shaped than V-shaped as all of us would like to see it. So wanted to hear your thoughts on how the small and medium enterprises, which are hugely distressed even till today. The process, of course, started much earlier with demonetization and some of the subsequent events thereafter. But how do you see this critical sector picking up? Because in the absence of that, the overall economy doesn't really, generate the level of employment that we would like to see coming out of it. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, sir.
I think you hit the nail on its head. This K-shaped recovery can be converted to V-shaped recovery. The only I can think of the major intervention is really much more massive expansion of vaccination. Because the reason, if you might have noticed, it's essentially the sectors or activities requires contacts. That's where it disappeared. And that's because there's vaccination out there and we're not supporting, and we don't have a health infrastructure. So vaccination for a good public health infrastructure is a solution because the problem lies there in my view. And then you can convert, as you rightly said, V recovery because those, I'm sure that your students would have found easier the jobs where they're far more led by work from home kind of categories, not sort of the categories which work in a group or work in a context where context takes place. So I think we have not, unfortunately, given adequate emphasis on expansion of vaccination. We didn't invest enough. We didn't, for instance, Mr. Poonawala was far more farsighted than the government was. He made investment ahead of and he took the risk. The government didn't give orders. For months and months, he was waiting for the orders when there was no production. So have we been a little more as farsighted as Mr. Poonawala was or Mr. Krishna was, that who were also, they didn't give money for expanding capacity. Government could have given a resources for expansion because so vaccination is, in my view, vaccine really holds the key to get more rapid progress on what you are saying. You are absolutely right about your observations about this. Still, it's not really the broad-based recovery. It's still not.
Okay.
Is-
Samrat,
is-
Samrat, who's the president of the student council, he has a question. Yeah.
Now, before I respond, I just
Yeah,
want to
please.
ask Salman Sahab
Yeah.
that I had a I was given a great honor by one of your distinguished Vice Chancellor, Najib Jan. I was a visiting professor at Jamia Millia.
All right.
I'm a great admirer of this institution.
Pleasure to hear that, sir.
Wonderful. Yeah, Samrat.
Yeah. Good evening, sir, and thank you so much for taking your time out. And sir, I wanted to know about your finance secretary journey, and also we have heard about the Kelkar committee, which came out with some recommendation for the government on the public-private partnership. So please help us know about the recommendations and how those recommendations you see working and getting fitted in this scenario in 2022.
I was asked by our Finance Minister Jaitley Sahab to sort of work on the issue of private-public partnership because there was a perception in India that time correctly that government can invest in number of infrastructure areas where private sector will not come on its own. But if there is a public-private partnership, then perhaps we can stimulate investment in number of infrastructure areas. That's the thought. So we were asked to look at what helps in promoting public-private partnership. We gave a detailed report on starting with the legal framework, because the legal framework has to be correct, because if you're asking private sector to take a long-term, all infrastructure projects are long-term. So if you want a long-term view for private sector, they want legal framework, which is well defined. So we argued for law, PPP law and PPP, which defines rights and obligations of both the parties, government and the private sector. Second is also, we also pointed out the how to design the contract, because long-term contracts you cannot. So government is used for so far contracts like building road or construction contracts. The construction contract job is over for 2-3 years. But when you're creating port or when you're creating a highway, these are 30-40 years of relationships. So a long-term contract has to be given enough flexibility, because you cannot envisage at T0 all the possible changes may occur in the next 20 years. So that's the other point we made. How to bring flexibility in the contract design. So the other, and last point which we made was the dispute settlement mechanism, because disputes will emerge, and what should be the dispute settlement mechanism without going to the courts, much larger. So we had a series of sort of recommendations on all these different areas, and I'm told it's still being implemented. I've not kept track what's happening recently, because I left Delhi years ago, and I really, frankly, I have not followed up what is happening. But I think it's still, our recommendation is still a very valid one, and I saw the references about it even in last budget speech. So I'm sure it seems that government is still using some of the ideas which were proposed in our report.
Yeah, sir.
Yeah,
thank
go ahead,
you.
Samrat. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
sir. Sir, I have a follow-up question. So, sir, in the first recommendation that you discussed, you said that government and partner and private companies are willing to go for a longer contract or longer duration of partnerships. So recently, last year, government came up with the national monetization pipeline, in which government is kind of giving the brownfield assets for 15-year lease to the private companies. So, sir, how you see that opportunity? And since governments are here for 5 years, so since once if one government gets changed, how it will impact the partnership or the contract? So the other government, if not provide that much support to the thing.
No,
So,
if there's a signed contract, I mean, it doesn't depend on which government is there. A contract is a contract between government is a continuing entity. I mean, the private sector will go to the courts and courts will decide. And courts will give, as everywhere, for instance, India has lost by not honoring the contracts in every case. India has lost in the Supreme Court, India has lost in international courts. Because as long as you have a rule of law, signed contract, you cannot unilaterally abrogate. Then you have to compensate. I mean, that's what you have to do. Government can change, but then it has to compensate because you are changing the contract. So it's a really rule of law is extremely important, and fortunately our courts have credibility in India that by and large our courts do value this sanctity of contracts. So that doesn't worry me that governments may change.
So our associate Dean Gurveer has raised his hand some time back. Gurveer Singh ji, please ask your question.
Good evening, Dr. Kelkar. Dr. Kelkar, my question is, world over, governments have turned protectionist, since the Trump era. Even though the government is now a democratic government in the US, they are still shades of protectionism. Brexit is an example of protectionism. The Indian government has slowly become more protectionism. Though we talk about foreign investment, we are more protectionist by nature, So how do you see the future of capitalism with governments turning more protectionist, world over,
As I mentioned to you, the world is not changing. It's essentially the powers which are already arrived. They are China is not protectionist. I mean, China is open. The RCEP was not a protection measure, which accounts now for 1/2 of the world economy. So there are forces in this economy, in the world economy, which are far more open. And I think the countries which were enjoyed the supremacy are sort of being threatened of. So they are going protectionist. But India is should not be protectionist. We are the rising power. I don't understand. I frankly don't understand why India should be protectionist. India is a rising trading power. We have a larger source levels of human capital. We should be aggressive in world trade. I don't understand this the highly defensive attitude of India. India should be asking for free trade. We are the one who are going to gain by access to the world economy. So there's rising trading power, rising power. Rising powers are not protectionist. It's a really declining powers tend to be protectionist. But Asia is rising Asia. So I don't think India should remain protectionist. We should be one of the champions of freer trade in the world trade. We should be champion of freer regional trade because we are rising power.
Thank you.
So can I just have a follow-up? But the government's actions are contrary to this. The RCEP, we withdrew from the negotiations. So while we are a rising power, but the thought process of the current government seems to be more on the protection side.
I think that's a good example, both bad art and science. It's bad in science, bad in art. So we have nothing to fear. We are very productive. We have all the sort of right policies. We would be numero uno in areas that we want to grow. I am quite confident. I think I don't know why we are. I really don't see the reason for defensive attitude because have a aggressive openness and India will grow.
Very nice.
Look at, can you imagine today, Bangladesh has a much larger textile industry than India. India should be closer to the world. It really beats logic.
That's right.
I don't understand, frankly. I want to ask you this question. Why is it so? I mean, your generation or younger generation, your students, They are there to conquer the world. They are not afraid. So I think we are cutting our own feet by going protectionist, frankly.
Very good. Mudit, your hand has been up for some time. I'm trying to balance both students' hand and faculty hand. So go ahead, Mudit.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Nowadays, as we all know that there are technological advancements. However, the challenge is of building the trust among citizens, which as of now I see people don't. So my question to you is that how do you think the government can build that general trust among people in this digital world?
By just telling, government has to start telling the truth. You cannot build trust in a party between two parties if one is not telling the truth. I think government should start treating Indian citizens as adults and tell the truth and walk the talk and talk the walk. Unfortunately, that's what's not happening. That's a crisis of trust. For instance, I don't know if you have seen the recent book of Akash Patel. If you've not seen it, I will encourage you to look at it. I mean, this is totally different about government tells about what's happening in the economy. He has just given the facts. So the trust is built by sharing the truth.
Wonderful. Anjali Ahuja, your hand has been up for some time. Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And Dr. Kelkar, a very warm welcome to you, to our institute. And it's been heartening to hear from you all this while. I have a question emerging from the comment that ministers are our change agents. Now, we often see and witness that many of our ministers in various quarters, various segments, their, nation's interests are compromised for personal interests. In a situation like this, don't you think there is really a crying need for some electoral reforms? Things like, bringing in some performance culture within the political system or within the government where, the people don't have to wait for 5 long years to assess the performance of ministers and then bring about the desired change. So what would be your thoughts on that, sir?
I think you're right about political reforms in two very important areas I would think of immediate answer. One is promote intra-party democracy. Our parties are becoming a family fief. So if there are no elections take place within the party, unless you have a democratic framework within the party, this is one I would argue. And second, strengthen parliament. Today the parliament don't meet, parliament don't discuss, no discussion takes place, there's accountability. Parliament is the most important instrument you want to have created as citizens for oversight on the government and promoting the accountability. There's a long-term the accountability is there by through elections. Elections only once in 5 years. But we want instruments of parliamentary accountability is the most important instrument for maintaining this ankush on the powers that they walk the talk, they follow the promise, and they're held accountable in the parliament, because that's where the accountability lies between the election years. Ultimately, of course, accountability is election. I mean, that's where you and I have a right as individual to exercise. But we can't vote every day in the parliament. It's about parliamentary. So I think parliamentary reforms are very important. And I'm a great admirer, of our committees, parliamentary committees. And they have become defunct. But they're very, very powerful tools for improving informed accountability of the government and on a continuous basis. So I would also, part of our parliamentary reforms are improving standing committees, they're empowering them. It's what, for instance, we don't give any analytical support or secretariat to our committees. I mean, they don't have, USA, for instance, there's a Congress budget office, CBO, and every committee has a staff. I think we have to strengthen the parliament and at the central level and state level, both. I'm talking about legislature improvement and strengthening them. That there, I think, as you said, we should probably pass a law that Parliament must meet and sit at least 135 days in a year. You can't just walk out and nothing discussion takes place. That's kind of things that we were to bring in working. To my mind, Parliament is the instrument for achieving what you want to achieve is accountability on day-to-day basis. Because election can't be accountability instrument for 5 years. It's only once in 5 years.
Sure.
What about between these 5 years? That's where you also require instrumentalities.
Sir, I have a follow-up question, please. The question is that, as you very rightly said, that there are some tools available, some mechanisms available. Of course, they go defunct over a period of time. That is a separate issue altogether. But the collateral damage in that kind of a scenario, sir, is that there is a loss of trust in the government. And that is when people start losing slowly the trust in the government, then, they have a kind of a, inertia, or they just step back and feel, that nothing can happen in this country. So that, of course, is a mindset kind of a change that it brings about in people. So how do we really resolve that kind of a situation? Because, people going into a kind of a resignation mode that, nothing can happen in this country. And that's a very dangerous kind of a mindset that can happen.
You're 100% right. That is also my continuous worry myself. That this kind of sense of ennui can lead to very, very dysfunctional outcomes for the system as a whole. I don't have an answer to you. I share your concern.
Sure.
And there's a grave danger in exactly what you're saying. That it can end up into a situation in which none of us would like it to be our country in. And I think that the more freer press will help. More freer and fair press will help to keep the pressure. That's why one of the important chapter in our book is about criticism. Why the criticism is very important in democratic systems. There's a beautiful saying in Marathi by Santa Tukaram. I say it in Marathi and I'll translate it. He says, Nindakache ghar asave shezari. He says, please invite your critic to stay next to your house. It should be your neighbor. Because then only you'll improve.
That is also said in the Guru Granth Sahib, sir. In the
Acha.
Guru Granth Sahib, exactly the same statement.
Okay.
Keep a nindak next to you. Yeah.
Guru Granth Sahib has many contributions from Namdev, Sant Namdev, who probably must have influenced this. Because there are lots of references for Sant Vangmay from Maharashtra of that time into Granth Sahib because of Namdev, Sant Namdev.
Yes, wonderful. Kush Jain, one of our students, is waiting to ask a question. Go ahead, Kush.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Very good evening, sir, and warm welcome to the soil. Sir, I have a question, which is which global trend do you think trends will shape the world or most consider the Indian economy after this pandemic situation arise in next 10 years? Which trends you look forward with?
I think we had to be very, very keep a close eye and simply global warming or climate change.
Okay.
That's a global phenomena which I think we must keep track and we have to do for our own sake, and we have to change and have a greener growth options all the time for the economy. So to my mind, that's going to be our next crisis, next challenge for India.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mala, you want to ask a question? Yeah, Mala.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So, welcome to Soil, Dr. Kelkar. It's an absolute honor listening to you. I have a question. India is still struggling to provide basic health, education, and sanitation to varied parts of the country. Sir, does this indicate a gap in the alignment of public policy and the government decision to implement the public policy? Sir, your views, please.
I think you have put the finger that one of the areas in which policy failure is that we didn't adequately invest in these public goods, namely public goods in terms of skills, public good in terms of public health, sanitation and water, and it's only recently we're sort of getting attention, which should have been much earlier, and that's where again the China had done enormous progress. Precisely, they first started with the public goods in the area of health and education. So I think our relative neglect of these sectors is now needs to be rectified. It's a policy failure.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Neetika Batra wants to ask a question. Yeah, our dean, Dr. Batra is the dean of our Gurgaon campus. Yeah, go ahead.
Dr. Kelkar, thank you so much for being here. It's truly an honor. And I have like so many questions bubbling in my mind, but I'll confine myself to probably two short ones. The first one would be, about your entire experience, because you have witnessed the growth of Indian economy and the country from a very early stage, from the 1960s and 70s to when privatization happened in the 90s, and then, the economic bubble and the crisis of 2007, and now we are into the world of unicorns and sunicorns, whatever we call them. And therefore, in hindsight, Dr. Kelkar, what is it that you think could have been done differently, with this growth trajectory that we saw? I mean, do you think we made all the right moves, or there was something that we could have done differently? And what would that be? So that our quantity as well as the quality of growth that we have seen could have been better today. So that is one question.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
I think the grave strategic error that we made is not changing our gears on trade policy. Earlier, this import substitution got distorted. There was analysis available by our own scholars like Professor Bhagwati, Professor Padma Desai, Professor Srinivasan, showing that it's leading to gross, and this is unfortunately right in front of our eyes. The countries of East Asia were progressing rapidly by not moving away from that. They also made the same mistake, but they quickly moved towards open economy. And I think that was probably one great error of not shifting our industrialization policy more open economy.
Mm-hmm.
And second error was relative neglect of agriculture in our first two plans. And by the time we realized that the neglect was a heavy price we paid, political price of 64, 65 droughts and humiliation by India, by the United States, and which of course led to Green Revolution. And in itself created other problems which are now we're facing, the problems of Green Revolution. But these are two areas in my view that where our error, we didn't change quickly enough towards a new trajectory.
And didn't create a strong foundation with agriculture or manufacturing, and probably straight move to the services.
Exports could have given us a basis for both productivity, income, and but it's not as if that it was not debated. There's a very interesting debate at the time of the second plan. The debate was steel versus textiles. The people who wanted textile industry were saying that we should be output oriented in exports. And steel lobby, or those who were steel, they wanted capital goods and say that India's economic strength. Also, there's a partly influence because of anti-imperialism and anti-colonial. They didn't want to depend on erstwhile metropolitan powers. That would have meant the openness. So they wanted that. So there's partly political, partly defense self-reliance. India was surrounded. The United States was very hostile at that time to Indian aspirations. So there were also the international factors. They were fair to policymakers at that time. It's easy to criticize from distance, but that time world looked very different because our Indian freedom fighters were very skeptical about the imperial powers. So,
And a second small question, Dr. Kelkar. I was reading about you and I came across an article which called you an economist with a heart of gold, you know. And we normally in Soil, we always talk about the balance of the heart and the brain and, you know, following social responsibility and giving back to the society. So, you know, that article quoted about your generosity to somebody at a, you know, station, local station where you know, helped somebody there. So how important you think is this whole, you know, framework of ethics and social good being part of a leader's life?
I think it's really whatever little bit I have is I could give entire to my parents and my wife. I mean, my wife ensures that I don't follow, take a single wrong step, frankly. And she kept me in a very gentle manner, but very firm. That she emphasized repeatedly the important values and what she wants and what she looks for, and my parents. So I think that kind of helped me to keep myself on the right path.
Thank you.
There are several other questions, but Vidya, a quick question from you and ANB. Just ask quickly, Vidya.
Good
Dr.
evening.
Vidya Iyer is the director of our Manesar campus. Yeah.
Namaskar, sir. Good evening.
Namaskar.
Sir, my question to you, and in fact, I seek an advice from you for our students. Most of our students look at public policy, general budget, and many things very disjoint from a PGDM or an MBA curriculum. Would you please advise them of the need or how they should be able to look at all of this in unison, because business is a very, you know, integral part of the entire wheel of economy, and students don't look at it with that wide angle lens. How would you like them to make this a, you know, a combined view? If you could just give us and them a piece of advice. Thank you so much.
No, I think there's so much interdependence now with the public economy and the private sector, that to be a good private sector manager, you must be mindful of what are the public issues are there, public policy issues. So it's inescapable. You can't, there's so much interdependence. I mean, you cannot live in a world in which you think that, you know, if you take the example of present pandemic is a very good example. And nobody's an island anymore. I mean, this little virus, which is we can't see, has completely, it can come and attack from anywhere, and you could be anywhere. So all are interdependent. It could be. So I don't think you are now. We are so much integrated with the world that you have to be mindful of how the society is moving and for what the issues are their public policy. So first, as I told you, private sector will be totally ill-informed if they are not concerned about climate, because that's going to affect their work environment, business environment, personal environment, everything. And that depends critically. The environment outcome will come depend on government policies. Policies will be very determinant on what's happening in our outcome.
I think, Atindra, you will have to forgive us because it's already the close of the hour, 7 o'clock. So we don't want to take more time from Dr. Kelkar. So here is something I'd like to say to all of us today. We saw in Dr. Vijay Kelkar's conversation with us today, not just clarity of the mind, but absolute ability to talk the truth. He's reminded us that this whole aspect of public policy has two parts to it. One is the science part, which requires conversations amongst people of different kinds to come together and to enrich in the conversation so that people are involved and you think holistically. The second, he said to us, there is an art, which is the whole process of aligning people. You know, if 10% is thinking about the direction, at least 40% of the time in a democracy is about making sure all the parts of the system are aligned to what we are trying to do. And then the remaining 60%, we can actually do the execution properly. He reminded us that you require a whole systems approach. He told us about the problems that we have failed when the art failed us, even though the science was okay. The third thing he said to us is that, you know, do not blame the system of the market economy. There is nothing wrong in the market economy or capitalism. It is our inability to govern ourselves effectively. When he reminded us that if Parliament does not work for 135 days in a year, and if we as citizens do not hold our own elected representatives accountable, we then begin to see the decay in the country. So I think I took the lesson out of this, that as we as citizens of this country, we just celebrated our Republic Day. Our job doesn't stop by electing people. Our job begins after that. And when we begin to take responsibility and come together, that is when wonderful things begin to happen. So Dr. Kelkar, thank you very much for coming. I'm really enjoying reading your book. And I urge every student, even though you may or may not be fond of reading, but this, do yourself a favor. You will become a better person by reading Dr. Vijay Kelkar's book. So thank you very much. And thank you everybody for investing this hour of your time. And thank you, Dr. Kelkar, for a brilliant session. And if we can give Dr. Kelkar a brilliant standing ovation.
Oh, no.
Very
kind of you. Very kind of you. Very kind of you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.